te whātua, whakatau, ngā manuhiri tuarangi, Gernot, Tina, e mihi kauatu ana rā ki a koutou. Talofa lava, kia orana, willkommen, welcome everybody. It's a real pleasure to be asked to speak, to open, to give a little mihi. I thought though that there might not be too many of you who would understand what I would say if I said it all in Māori. So I've chosen today instead to share with you some poetry. And in the process, gather together some of the ideas of the ritual, greeting, encounter that we have, and also to touch on some of the themes that I suspect Gernot may be sharing with us and talking to later, and that the symposium is also addressing. The idea of atmosphere. When we talk about atmosphere in Māori, one of the words that we use is rangi. And rangi is also day, and is also our sky father, one of our primordial ancestors. So when we talk about atmosphere, we're also talking about ourselves. Not something that's separate from us, but is part of us, and we are part of it. Or rather, its many forms and existences. Because there isn't just one atmosphere, there are many atmospheres in Māori thinking. There are many names for rangi. And not only is rangi our father, he is also an ancestor from which perception also arises by way of a genealogy, a whakapapa. So our connection to atmosphere, to the nature of perception, our very existence and the way in which we perceive our existence is all understood in terms of whakapapa, a relational form of understanding the world. So when we talk about rangi, we can also talk about the many different states that we understand the heavens or the atmosphere to be. Another way of thinking about atmosphere in Māori is to be thinking about, of course, as in English and other languages, our moods and our emotions. And the first poem I'd like to share with you is from someone whom, in light of today's symposium, we might call one of the New Zealand geniuses at commanding a sense of atmosphere, or creating a sense of atmosphere in what he does. And I refer to Hōne Tūwhare. And I'm going to share with you a poem called Tangi. Tangi is a lament. It's also to cry, to weep. And in our formal addresses in Māori, one of the first things that we do is to draw together our many ancestors, those who have passed away, and in sharing that memory, we are also closer together. Tangi. I did not meet her on the bordered path, nor detect her fragrance in the frolic of violets and carnations. She did not stroll riverward to sunsplash and shadows, to willows trailing garlands of green pathos. Death was not hiding in the cold rags of a broken dirge, nor could I find her in the cruel laughter of children, the curdled whimper of a dog. But I heard her with the wind crooning in the hung wires, and caught her beauty by the coffin, muted to a softer pain, in the calm vigil of hands, in the green-leaved anguish of the bowed heads of old women. The second reference, or poetic reference I want to make, is to Rangi Uia, who is a tohunga from Ngāti and who was a tohunga at Rawhiuro Wharewana at Uawa in Tolaga Bay, which is the part of the country that my ancestors come from, that I call home. And one of the beautiful waiata tangi that he composed was a lament for his son. And in that lament, he refers to a particular wind from the south. Now, in people who know the history and who are from Ngāti will be familiar with the many different waiata tangi in which this particular wind is used to refer to particular people, to particular states of misfortune, malady, evil. And in this case, Rangi Uia, think about Rangi again, Rangi Uia referred to Te Mātaurahunga, who was also a famous tohunga at this wharewana, at this house of learning. And Rangi Uia believed that it was because of Te Mātaurahunga that his son died. He believed that Te Mātaurahunga cast a makutu, a spell over his son, caused him to die. But in that particular waiata tangi, he talks about this wind from the south, and if you are familiar with the history, you understand the specifics. He's not really talking about, he's not talking in a metaphorical way, he's actually talking about Te Mātaurahunga. He's not saying Te Mātaurahunga is like the wind, he's not likening one thing to another. He is the south wind. And the south wind for others also takes on a different persona. The last poem I wanted to share with you was just a little extract from something that I wrote and included as part of my thesis. And in this, I was also thinking about relationships between land, between the sky. In Māori mythology, the distance between sky and Papatuanuku, earth, is a source of continued lament. Rangi was separated from his partner by his children and is forever lamenting, weeping at this loss. So the elements that we know, the source of rain, water, these are expressions of grief. We see and understand these things through our understanding of the environment and including the atmosphere. Sorry, I just misplaced the page. Grief carries us home, ebbs and flows with the tide, pedals and surges through veins, powers and floats surging through water. Grief takes charge, inspiring command, declaring another call to arms, to action, to move again, to haul and lift up over rocky shore. Rise and fall of this melody is Rangi, hugging, hovering, soaring, yearning over land. Grief trembles, expanding air, thunders and tumbles, clouded. Grief howls, wind over sand, galloping in from the sea, swoops up to smother views from the edge of an abyss. Above and below, towards and away, resoundings shudder to land, torn, numb, dripping to sodden dust. Tangi, a lament, moves and cries. So this is just a small extract. When we talk about tangi though, and in this ritual acknowledgement of those who passed, we are not just lamenting, we are not just grieving, we are also coming together as the living. We are the living faces of our ancestors. We are also the embodiment of atmosphere. Kia ora.
It is a great honour to host someone as eminent and as well respected as Gernot Böhme, Emeritus Professor of Philosophy at Darmstadt Technical University. Professor Böhme has over the last decade and more attracted greater and greater attention with and through world leaders in architecture such as Peter Zumthor and Herzog and de Meuron, in fine arts such as James Turrell and Olafur Eliasson, and in theory such as Juhani Pallasmaa and Tim Ingold. Professor Böhme's essential concerns are the preservation of both human values and the natural world under the prevailing conditions of technological civilization. In his intention to extend philosophical aesthetics, he conceives aesthetics as aesthesis and as a general theory of perception. As a general theory of perception. The concepts of design, nature and art form the centre of his reflections. The task of aesthetics is not to be a mere medium for the transmission of modern art. Rather, aesthetics has also to take up the theme of human beings' new relationship to a natural world increasingly shaped by their action. By perception, Böhme understands a mode of bodily presence with an emphasis on emotional components. Thus, perception with him is primarily the sensation of a presence or alternatively a certain atmosphere. What Böhme calls atmosphere is a co-presence that exists within the terms of the subject-object division. It is the primary reality aesthetics has to deal with and within which moods and effects play a key role. Böhme is the author of numerous books, among which Architecture and Atmosphere, Munich 2006, is outstanding for its new reading of architecture and the city. Professor Böhme's visit contributes greatly to our research environment, and this symposium, following on from the highly successful event with our last distinguished visitor 2 years ago, has attracted an eminent group of presenters. His keynote will be published in Interstices 15, Atmosphere, Felt, Space. I'd like you to join me in welcoming Professor Böhme to the University of Auckland.
Well, I first like to thank Diana for the kind introduction, and also I want to say that I appreciated very much the introduction connecting our theme to the Maori tradition. I very often try things like that myself. For example, I think that the concept of atmosphere has something to do with Chinese and the Japanese concept of chi or ki, and quite recently a PhD doctoral thesis has been finished by a Japanese student of mine who wrote about ki in Japanese tradition, and with an interpretation from the side of phenomenology and the concept of atmosphere. So thank you very much also for that. And then, well, thank you in general for the opportunity talking to you and being together with you. And this goes to the University of AUT, and in particular to Tina, who arranged for all of this. Thank you so much. So at the very beginning, I think I must confess I am always fighting with the atmosphere here. Well, does anybody know what the paradigm of this You are architects. What is it? Well, this is the anatomic theater. Well,
Can we have a course?
yeah. Well, so this is not very good for the feeling, at least if you know that. The other thing is we have no daylight in here. I said we are so bright weather, and now we are sitting here in such a dull room. But in addition, it's rather dark, isn't it? Can't we make more light? So these were the last words of the German famous poet Goethe when he was dying. More light! Anyway, I think as the general topic of our conference is on atmospheres and effects, it might be good to, at the very beginning, to try to get a clear concept of atmosphere. So this is why my keynote addresses like an introduction to the theory of atmospheres. So first, I'd like to say how I came to this concept of atmospheres. And the point is that I came from a criticism of ecology. At that time, in Darmstadt, we had a working group called Soziale Naturwissenschaft, Social Natural Science, and this group had the purpose to find out whether one can extend ecology by human aspects, because ecology as we have it, or we had it at that time, is just a natural science, and the human, the particular human aspects are not included in ecology. And if we are talking about human ecology, something comes in for how we are existing in a certain environment or feeling in a certain environment, and this is aesthetics. So the very beginning of my reflection, which led me to the concept of atmosphere, was that ecology, if it should be about human environment, it must include aesthetic aspects. And this was the reason why I introduced the concept of atmospheres. So, for human ecology, or human thinking about your environment, it's not only important the metabolism, or say whether the air is toxic or not, but it is also, in addition, it is necessary to talk about how do you feel? How do you feel in a certain room like this? And the concept of atmosphere is mediating the objective, say, surrounding, the objective constellations with your bodily feeling. And this is what is mediating those two parts. On the one hand, the objective factors and constellations, and on the other hand, the bodily feeling. The atmosphere is what is in between and what mediates these two sides. But from here, immediately, some very important problem arises, because we are talking about a certain in-between, which is neither totally objective nor totally subjective. And this is a theoretical problem. I think we might follow up this problem. But this was my way to the concept of atmosphere. Historically, the philosopher, he emphatically systematically introduced the concept of atmosphere is Hermann Schmitz in Kiel, and he came from Rudolf Otto, namely Rudolf Otto talking about the numinous. So what affects you from natural or supernatural powers, you know, the numinous. And this was Rudolf Otto who worked on that, and Hermann Schmitz continued talking about atmospheres. But the first person who, within scientific discussion, used the concept of atmosphere is Herbert Tellenbach, who wrote a book in the 50s. Hubert Tellenbach was a psychiatrist, and he wrote a book on Geschmack und Atmosphäre that maybe translated in smell and atmosphere. And well, in Germany the concept Geschmack is just pointing to the sense of the oral. So the taste and smell together. And Tellenbach introduced the concept of atmosphere as, say, sort of a smell in a room, and he pointed to the fact that even with animals there is sort of the smell of the nest. So feeling at home has to do how a room smells. And well, this is Hubert Tellenbach. He was not a philosopher, so the further line of discussion is within phenomenology. Well, this is my first point, namely my personal background and the historical background of the concept of atmosphere. Now I must say that the concept of the term atmosphere at the very beginning was a metaphor, and this metaphor was taken from meteorology. So the atmosphere actually, up to now, is the upper part of of the air surrounding the Earth. Well, and I made a small study on the poet of Goethe, and I thought that at his time, that is 18th century, 90% of his usage of atmosphere was still meteorology, from meteorology, and not only 10% the concept, the term atmosphere as a metaphor. Now, the term atmosphere is quite usual and in all European languages, and means a space with a mood. So there are two very important factors. It's always a space, but in a sense a loaded space, namely a space, a tuned space, a space with a mood. So, for example, when I just recently experienced the fact that a hotel where I had been overnight gave such a sheet where you answer how did you like this hotel, and there was a question, how did you like the atmosphere in our hotel? And you know, so this is everyday speech. And this was in 4 European languages: German, English, French, and Italian. The term atmosphere. So it's quite usual, and nobody. It's not necessary to know that it originally stems from meteorology. So now, I have given a first definition, namely a space with a mood or a tuned space. And now, what is very interesting is that you can talk about this atmosphere. in a sense, it's something vague, it's something in between, but we are very much used to talk about. Namely, we can identify the characters of an atmosphere. And the character of the atmosphere is the way how the tuned spaces has a tendency to tune yourself. So when you come into a room where there is a certain tension in the air, and then you are affected by this tension on yourself, that you feel it on yourself bodily. So there are the characters, and the tuning of the space is tuning yourself. Now, I already turned to applications, and I think this is very important because I think what atmospheres really are, we don't learn so well from just the theory. We must turn to the application. And to my mind, the very fundamental application is scenography, or the art of stage setting. For me, the art of stage setting is, say, a paradigm even for the theory of atmospheres. Namely, stage setters or stage designers from the very Greek antiquity were used to produce a certain, what they say today, a certain climate on the stage. That means a certain mood which, in a sense, affects the audience, so that they get into a certain mood to follow the drama, but on the other hand, it's sort of a resonance for the actors on the scene. And, well, therefore we can tell that the theory of atmosphere might be something new, or stems from recent discussions, but the practice with atmospheres is rather old. So we have to learn much about atmospheres when studying, for example, scenography, or the art of stage setting. Another, but quite related practice where we can learn a lot about atmospheres, and which also has to do with the way how you produce atmospheres, is the theory of English gardening. And, well, by the end of the 18th century, a book of C.C.C. Hirschfeld was published, a 5 volumes book on the theory of English gardening. And this book is full of regulations and recommendations how to produce a scene in English garden. He is talking about themes, natural themes, and what is needed for that. So, on the one hand, he talks about what I call the character. So there are different characters of the scenes. For example, they may be what his term is soft, melancholic, or heroic, or joyful. And he says that the English garden, or the English park, is sort of a series of scenery. So, but what is very important is that here, for gardening, he uses a term coming from stage setting. He is talking about natural themes. And on the other hand, he also talks about characters, and characters are also something which is used when talking about theater. So now what is very important, and in a sense the answer to the question which was put before, thank you, which was put before in the discussion between these architects, how can you produce a certain atmosphere, what you like, what must you do to do that? And Hirschfeld is very much explicit about that. He says, well, you must plant those types, species of plants, and the light must fall this or that way, and the murmur of the brooks must be this or that way, so that you can produce a melancholic atmosphere, for example. So, and you actually can learn a lot about how producing atmospheres is studying the theory of English gardening. So this was my first field of application, namely the field of stage setting, including the art of gardening. The second very important field of application is commodity aesthetics. You know, commodity aesthetics, in a sense, this was an idea of Walter Benjamin in his unfinished work on the arcades, but in Germany it was explicitly made as theory, namely by Wolfgang Fritz Haug, and he wrote a book on critique on commodity aesthetics. It also is available in English. Well, the very idea of Benjamin was that already in what he calls high capitalism, but this was capitalism around 19th century, in the arcades, the commodities were already staged. They appeared in a sort of a stage or theater in the arcades. And, well, you see again that here the background of the theory of scenographia or stage setting comes into the discussion. And well, it was Walter Benjamin who talked about, he was first to talk about commodity aesthetics. Well, I will continue on that because nowadays there is a new shift in commodity aesthetics. But yes, yeah. Well, I just turn to one of these shifts, namely, originally commodity aesthetics was the art or to present your commodity very attractive, so that clients are willing to buy. And therefore, for example, with Wolfgang Fritz Haug, the very main point of commodity aesthetics was about wrapping. So, putting the commodity into a certain nice wrapping, and on the other, and then the consequence was that when you buy this commodity, take it home, and you want to use it, you open the wrapping, and the wrapping is put away. And this means that the commodity, I mean, as to Wolfgang Fritz Haug, only applies to the market, not to the place of users at home. But there has been an important shift, namely that commodity aesthetics become an element of the use of the commodities. And this is what I call aesthetic capitalism. So here is a link of commodity aesthetics on our topic of atmosphere to the state of capitalism we are living with. Namely, our Western sound, or also New Zealand or Japanese capitalism is, in a sense, developed capitalism, because the very purpose of production is no longer to fulfill basic needs. If this was the central purpose of production, then the markets would be satisfied rather quickly, and there will be no further growth. And the point is that now capitalism produces not for use, but for the aesthetization of our world, or a certain lifestyle. So actually for the stage setting of our private life, but not only private life, also public life, things like that. And I think by going back to Marx, Karl Marx, and I dwelt upon, when talking about commodity aesthetics, there is a difference between the use value of a commodity and the exchange value. The use value is the value the commodity has for you when you use it. For example, you buy a knife, the use value is the possibility to cut with a knife. But there is also the exchange value. It is the value the commodity has when it appears in the market. And this is realized through commodity aesthetics. So the value on the market is not just that it might be useful after buying it, but the attractiveness on the market. This is commodity aesthetics. And now the new situation is that we get a new type of commodity value, namely what I will call stage value. This means that what originally was just the exchange value now has a certain importance within the realm of using the commodity, namely staging our own life. So most of commodities we buy, we don't really need to fulfill our basic needs, but it's just, say, for the aesthetization of our life. So, commodities in our state of capitalism are to a great extent not for consumption, but for the staging of a certain lifestyle. So this through equipment and furniture and clothing, things like that. So this is the first extension of commodity aesthetics in our days. The other is this, which is much more impressive, that commodity invades the realm of production. And my main example for that is in the city of Dresden, a part of VW production, namely the production of the phaeton, in a building called Gläserne Manufaktur. Well, one point is that this gläserne Manufaktur is a corner of the so-called Great Garden, a Baroque garden in Dresden, and now you have an industrial building there, totally out of glass, and what is going on there is that this car, the Phaeton, is produced within this gläserne Manufaktur in a sort of a shop display. So it has also a restaurant. You can sit there and eat and have your champagne, and through the glasses you see how your car is produced. And the workers are not in blue overall, but they have white clothing and they have gloves, and the floor is like here, parquet. Everything is totally neat and not what we understand the realm of production may be, namely that there is much dirt and everything is dark. This part is done outside the city, and the parts for the assembling for the Phaeton are brought in by a special tramway, a blue tramway passing the whole city. So VW produced, bringing to the gläserne Manufaktur the parts for the final assembly of the Phaeton. So this is what I mean, that the commodity aesthetics is invading the product, the realm of production. So, I mean, there may be more examples for that commodity aesthetics invades so many fields where commodity initially doesn't belong to. So my third example is a certain shift in advertising, namely advertising for commodities. Originally, say around 1900, was very precisely giving a picture, a very informative picture about the commodity. So, for example, if there is you want to sell knives, there is a very precise picture of the knife, and so that you can see that it's sharp and well made. But this type of advertising has grown old, and now we have the meaning, the dominating type of advertising is totally different. But for example, if they want to advertise something about a knife for cooking, then they don't show the knife, but they show the total scenery of the hobby cook and the kitchen, and somewhere there might be the knife. But this means that the knife is not primarily for cutting something in the kitchen, but it belongs to the scenery, you know, it's the staging of a certain person as a hobby cook. And well, you may have examples for it. For example, the advertising of what they call futon bags. You have also a scenery landscape or so, and somewhere there may be also you may detect a bag from futon. But you know, the point is that most of our commodities are not really for use, or they are, in a sense, they are there's the use of a, say, second level, namely that they are just ingredients of your scenery. And this applies to a knife, but it actually might never be used, or to a bag, but just belongs to a certain lifestyle. So the commodity now is not really used for a certain purpose, but it has to show that you are belonging to a certain group or stratum of the population, and that in a sense you distinguish yourself from other groups within society just by wearing or having this or that commodity. So this was about advertising and the marketing. So I have got some more time. Well, the term of, or the idea of atmosphere also applies on arts proper. Namely, originally, seen from the observer, we had an aesthetic of reception, and on the other hand, aesthetic of production. But now we have a situation where the way of talking about art is no longer just hermeneutics or semantics. So no, it's not the main topic of talking about art or experience art is not so much the meaning of it, because many modern pieces of art have no meaning. Yeah. Up to now it sounds like a joke, but actually what is necessary to value a piece of art must be to experience it. You must have time and to be together with this work of art, and then you may identify that it emanates a certain atmosphere, and this atmosphere affects you. This applies in particular to installation and land art. Therefore, I think that the reproduction of, for example, land art by photographs is insufficient. With installation, it's not possible anyway. You must just be there and have your experience. So this applies in particular to sound art. So this is a big movement, namely sound installations, and they are, in a sense, producing an acoustic environment, and to appreciate it, you must be present. You even can't reproduce this by recording and listening through earphones. You must be present to have a feeling what sort of atmosphere is acoustically produced by this type of art. Here we notice that a worldwide movement coming from Murray Schafer, namely soundscape, is meeting what originally was called concrete music. So soundscape produces certain new type of music or installations on the other, and this on the other side is what, for example, John Cage already did with his, so for example, with his piece of oratorio. So, and this type of art now also gets a practical application, namely, at least in Europe, one is talking about the tuning of a city. So, artists, sound artists are invited to reflect what actually the tuning or the acoustic atmosphere of a city is, and to make applications and suggestions to develop this. Well, I have mentioned quite important field of application, and I hope that you understand that a lot of research is necessary to go into details here. And this is necessary because these applications have a practical aspect. I just talked about tuning of the city. Cities today sometimes have a light designer already, and this means that a city today needs some staging. So the image of the city is also a marketing product. So the atmosphere of a city becomes a concern for city policy. Well, this brings me back to the very beginning. At the beginning I said that there is a very close relation to the art of stage design, and I think that most of the applications of the idea of atmosphere has to do with staging everything in our life. Cities, our personal lifestyle, politics are staged even in democracy, and very important sportive events. Think of the opening of the Olympiad in Peking, Beijing, or in London. So a huge event of produced atmospheres. So if you go in detail, you will find that this art of designing atmospheres pervades almost everything in our life. Thank you. Precursors, or on the other hand, we try to conceive of these traditional experiences, say, in a secularized way, because many of these traditional ideas have a, say, religious impact. And this was already at the beginning of the phenomenology of the atmosphere, namely the turn from Rudolf Otto to Hermann Schmidt. Rudolf Otto was talking about deities and theological entities. And Hermann Schmidt said this is atmospheres, and atmospheres are something like feelings in the air. So emotional powers. So this is a secularized concept of, say, Moana, spirit, and these older ones.
space with a mood, which runs parallel to the theory of aesthetics as a theory of perception, highly problematic. In the sense that you seem to be treating atmosphere as a matter of perception rather than a matter of reality. And in doing so, you seem to be denying, for example, harmony and beauty as qualities, independent qualities, internal to the object of appreciation. But of course, I can understand where you're coming from, and your position will be understood in the broader context of the German philosophical tradition of idealism, which treats reality as mind-dependent, as a matter of perception rather than a matter of reality. So I find it hard to appreciate your position in that regard. I don't know. That's my reading of your exposition of the topic.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes. Well, yes, I feel those objections, and but the first thing I would like to say is I make a difference between reality and actuality. In German, Realität und Wirklichkeit. So reality, taken from the origin of the term, has to do with the things. Res means things. So, and we are inclined to accept as reality just which has a bodily existence. And clearly, atmospheres don't have that. This is one point. The other point is that atmospheres are characterized as something in between. There is an objective side, namely, when you talk about atmospheres from the side of production, then there are real facts, constellations, by which atmospheres are produced in brightness, not causally produced, but so given the chance to develop. Because on the other hand, the atmospheres always have a subjective side. They must be perceived. You must be present as a sensitive person to feel what character is in the air. Yeah? What is the mood? So there is something in between. But you know, the very strange thing is that we intersubjectively can talk about atmospheres, not about the way we are struck, but what the character is. So for example, there might be a discussion of the atmosphere of this room, and I think we might even to come to sort of a consensus, and this is very important that we now have to do with something which what Hermann Schmitz called quasi-fact, because, or subjective fact, then, so it actually is subjective because you must feel it. But on the other hand is that communication about what you are feeling, about the what is possible, and even to come to agreement on what is in the air. So, I mean, this is phenomenology.
Isn't there a distinction between creative production and consumptive?
Yeah, yes.
Whereas creative production merely discovers things and objects, and consumptive, that's my point, the production involves the use of those qualities in terms of satisfying the demand, which are two totally different things altogether.
Yeah, this is totally different ways of approaching the atmospheres. And on the one hand, you can approach atmospheres from the side of the constitutive facts or arrangements. And on the other hand, you can approach from the consumer, perceiver, and then you have subjective facts. But I want to make the point that it is not as subjective as we think. It is not, it doesn't just depend on your perspective, because it is possible to discuss about what character is in the air. And my main example again for this is the art of stage setting. This art would be useless or nonsense if the stage setter could not expect that an audience will perceive what he produces on the stage at least at a similar way. So stage setting is also again is crucial for the whole theory.
We have another question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very analytical take on atmospheres. I have a question about something that you started with, which was about the human element.
Yeah.
And then you gave a very wonderful exemplification of this art of stage setting, stage design. But I'm wondering, where does that leave the human agency, subjectivity? Are we then performers or actors? And to sort of bring in another theorist, as Judith Butler has argued, we have performers in bodies. We know what to do in particular stage settings, as if we're a little bit programmed, if you like. Where does that leave the human?
Well, that is true. I mean, there are some different aspects where the human factor comes in, and one is that we, as living persons and participants of life, are always producing atmosphere. And this is the point which I didn't mention, namely that for human communication between two persons, immediately if they meet, a certain atmosphere will evolve. And what is possible to be said and to be understood depends on this personal atmosphere. So this is one way where the human comes in. The other point is that by producing atmospheres, we may be manipulated, because if the stage shifter is producing a certain stage, a certain climate on the stage, or the designer for a gallery or a shopping center is producing a certain atmosphere, or he tries to bring you into a certain mood which is adequate for buying. Or the same applies for sportive events, and what is more important even is what Walter Benjamin in his famous article from 1937, namely the work of art in the age of technical reproduction, pointed to is the aesthetization of politics. I mean, this at that time applied to Nazi, nationalsozialistische events, but also to socialists, was quite late. But today we live in democracy, and what do we experience? Staging of politics is so important. So this is the other side, and therefore my theory of atmosphere has also a critical impact. So this is a way where I am engaged in, say, human dignity or the human segment.
said about the art of designing atmospheres, and picking up from the discussion earlier as well. And the idea that there might be certain formulations for the creation of different kinds of atmospheres. I'm not sure if you're really talking about architecture, but it's, that for me seems to leave the question of what sort of atmosphere should the designer create. How is that then, how does that evolve?
Well, it is not me to prescribe what sort of atmosphere should be produced. I mean, just talking about the fact that the work of the architect, for example, is important part is creating atmospheres. Well, they did that since ever, but the development was thus that in a sense it was forgotten. Take for example Vitruvius. He said that man is the measure of architect of buildings, but this man, his body in his size was important for the scale and the proportions of the whole building. And now what he didn't mention, but what becomes more important for us, is that the man, people in their bodily existence now are important for how architectural construction should be designed. So, I mean, the concept, architecture seen from the side of the consumer or the people dwelling in it or moving in it. I mean, this is the new, in a sense, it's a new explicit idea which is going to become a guide to architecture.
So another way of asking the question would be the distinction that you seem to be making between the experience of the body and sort of critical faculty. I was wondering if you could say something a bit more about that, because it seems to me that the kinds of atmospheres that architects would be producing must involve a critical faculty as well.
Yeah, I think so, yes. Well, and sometimes they did not. Well, I made an article on the holy atmospheres of churches, for example. I made another article on the scenic arrangement which Albert Speer made in the time of the Nazi, and the purpose that they tried to mobilize the masses. And so there comes these critical aspects comes into the theory. But I think it's not the job of the philosophy to prescribe what atmosphere should be produced. I think philosophy at its best is critical theory.
I wasn't suggesting that it should be, but I'm interested in that relationship between the bodily experience and the intellectual understanding.
Aha, yeah. I see, yeah. Well, but in a sense, this was my answer, that the intellectual understanding sheds a new light on the whole field, which is so broadly extending in our days. And therefore, for example, I coined this idea of aesthetic economy. So I think what the philosopher can do about it, or the intellectual, is by reflecting the whole process, bringing into a better understanding what actually is going on, and also, in a sense, some criticism on that. So it may be termed a critical theory.
So thank you very much for your talk, and it's very interesting. I was just thinking about atmospheres, and particularly thinking about why, as an architect, why should we care about atmospheres? Because if I produce a space, that space will have an atmosphere, whether I like it or not. So if I want to produce a particular atmosphere, then I get into theory of perception or marketing, and I produce a particular atmosphere. So then why should I care about atmosphere?
Well, in a sense, it is not possible to produce a space without atmosphere. But, I mean, there are, say, low or dull atmosphere. But, I mean, as to the development of architecture, today the point is the turn away from modernism. Namely, the Bauhaus theory, namely that form follows function. The idea that the very good piece of architecture will just be functional. But in reality, it was not just functional. But they were, very mathematical, they are clear. And today, in a sense, you see a piece of architecture stemming from the so-called international style, you sometimes feel it's dull. No? And this turn to postmodern architecture means that now they come back to the job of the architecture, which he had, of the architect, which at the very beginning he had, namely that he is not only producing geometrical spaces, but bodily spaces, spaces which you are bodily moving and you have get a certain feeling. So I might add this to my introduction, namely in German we have a very nice switch, namely you can say in meinem Befinden fühle ich, in welchem Raum ich mich befinde. This kind of feeling. So, in my bodily feeling, I notice in what space I'm present. And this is the relation. And therefore I think that architecture should or they begin already to take more into account how people are feeling within their creative surroundings, their rooms or their places or so. So the human factor comes into that.
Yeah, we've been doing that for 1,000 years.
In a sense, but I hinted to the development of modernism, Bauhaus architecture, and they wanted to get rid of it. And so Adolf Loos said that decoration, this is crime. This is argument. Decoration is crime. So you must be totally, your building must totally be functional. This was the idea, but we are moving away from this idea.
Yeah, one more question.
Yeah, it was just one thing I would like to ask whether you conceive atmospheres as a, let's say, a finished product rather than a thing that's constantly added on to and constantly produced, because that's where all, for me, these questions that were kind of asked here come. It's like a blending of two parts of atmospheres. There is, of course, maybe a product in this room now that's maybe emanating from the materials, whatever happened in the room, and on top of that is what we now, every single person is emitting in terms of what they feel and what they think. And I guess that's what then kind of makes the atmosphere a co-production. And
Yes.
maybe that's why we can communicate about it. And it might not be the same thing, but there's basis.
Yes, that's right. Actually, atmospheres are something, say, floating. No? Well, it's developing, and also they always depend on what is going constancy. So in my article on the atmosphere of churches, I discussed the question what secularization of these buildings will mean. And I in detail studied 3 churches in Maastricht in the Netherlands. One church is a hotel by now, the other a bookshop, and the third is a playing ground. And so it's so interesting to go in there and whether you still feel a hint of the holy atmosphere. And I think more or less you do. But I mean, sometimes it is so that that architecture is being in stone has also a constant emanation. My main example is the Sforza Palace in Milano, a huge building, a fortress, and if you approach it, you feel the atmosphere of power. And a friend of mine couldn't even stand it. She must leave the area because it was so oppressive, the building. I mean, as to me, I'm very much aesthetical oriented and historical. I know what it is about, so I don't feel it so immediately as my friend did it. But I mean, I take the example because the Sforza castle in Milano is today it's a monument, but huge. Yeah? And it has, to my feeling, it has is the emanation which it originally should have. This was the idea, namely to make a building which says, well, the power is here.
Okay, Gernot, thank you very much. We'll proceed on from here to the launch of Interstices 14, the issue which just come out, in which Tina English-Fassbauer put so much work into, and I think she will speak on behalf of the editor. And that will be followed by drinks or accompanied by drinks. So I just ask you to express your thanks to Gernot one more time.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Well, I'm happy the flowers are still there. So it's no easy task to make concluding remarks to this wonderful meeting. So, well, the general impression is that it was rather stimulating, and I think in particular of the discussions, and so because I prefer each presentation discussed by itself, but I had the experience that here it worked very well, so that we had a common discussion for quite a group, and this, I think it was the chance to raise common topics in which it might be different from the topics those the reference brought forward. Well, this is not the place for acknowledgements now, but at least I want to mention that the clustering of the presentations was rather good, and the headings of those clusters. So I think, I guess this goes in particular, this compliment goes to Andrew. Anyway, so now I can't give a summary of the whole thing, and this is already the case because of the Cartesian law that a body can't be in two places at the same time. Yeah. And as to me, in addition, need some sleep after lunch, so I missed some of these presentations. So I decided that it might be better, instead of a summary, to give some methodological consideration at the very end. So some reflections which arose from in particular from the discussions. And well, so my first point is that actually we had a rather specific topic. Atmosphere is not just a topic as all other topics, or not a thing you can have and consider. Atmosphere is around you. And well, one can question whether the organization of our meeting did reflect on this. Because, you know, we are always in an atmosphere, and also when we are discussing together or we're sitting in a room or so. And so I think this is something which must be reflected in when you do a conference on atmosphere. So the question is the actual environment, is it adequate for this topic or not? And or may there arise a performative contradiction between what is at stake and, well, the room you are living in. So there are some problems here, and I think atmosphere in this sense is a very specific topic that if you try to talk adequately about it, you must also give the chance to reflect on your actual experiences. Anyway, my more specific considerations go to the relation of atmosphere to concepts on the one hand and to images on the other hand. Well, we had this nice presentation of Hannes about clouds or atmospheres as clouds, and well, this was quite adequate because atmospheres are something cloudy or vague. So the problem is, are there really concepts of atmospheres, and how to talk about atmospheres? So it was raised by Michael. Here's coming, guess. Well, the question whether it's possible to have some rigor in your talking about atmospheres. So, well, atmospheres are like clouds, so they change in their shape, and they are diffuse, and they have a weight consistency, and in particular they give rise for fantasy. So how to talk about that? Well, one answer applies already to the clouds. As you know, we have very nice talking about clouds stemming from Howard from Great Britain and Goethe from Germany, and there are clear differentiations between types of clouds, so cirrocumulus and cumulus clouds and things like that. And these terms, when talking about clouds, they differentiate between types of clouds, and this is important for weather forecasting, things like that. At least traditional weather forecasting without measurement. So starting from the morphology of the clouds, this was at the time of Goethe very important. So even in the realm of clouds, you come to the result that the talking about the weight must not be vague. So this is a difference. The concept must not be vague if they are concept of something vague. And this applies in particular to our topic, namely the atmospheres. So at the very beginning I told that atmosphere, you can't talk about atmosphere of their character, namely the tendency they have to tune your mood. So, and you have clear talking about this, and you intersubjective agreement about what the character of a certain atmosphere is. So this is one way seen from the perspective of the participant or the perceiver, and there is much more chance to talk about objectively about atmosphere from the side of the production of atmosphere. So there are certain objective facts which at least are the boundary conditions for certain atmospheres to arise. And what I pointed back to what I said at the beginning, namely that the art of stage setting is paradigmatic for this, because the stage artist knows what to do, what things to be used, what type of light, sound, what icons to produce a certain atmosphere. So there is quite a objective way of talking about atmospheres coming from the side of producing atmospheres. Nevertheless, the atmospheres in themselves, they are vague. And this is the reason why Hermann Schmitz, one of the big philosophers who made analysis on atmospheres, he is also a logician, and he developed a logic of chaotic manifolds. This is, I mean, in the history of logic, this is a very important step. Because if you are talking about manifolds, say, coming from mathematics, the manifold has elements which are clearly distinct to another, and they have their own identity. And what Hermann Schmitz says is that atmospheres are clearly manifolds, that they have parts, elements, but those are not clearly distinct from each other. They are molding to each other, and they have no identity. What for him means you can't identify them one by one. So actually, he says you can't count the elements of a chaotic manifold. I think this is a very nice concept, chaotic manifold. And it gives the chance of talking much more also about what the atmospheres are in themselves as an entity. You know, this is something related to what all of you know, fuzzy logic. So he is not the first to make such suggestions. So this was my first point, namely the relation of atmospheres to concepts or ways of talking. The other is the relation of atmospheres to images. Well, looking back, we are coming to the end of a festival of slides. Well, and it was a big show, you know. I think all of us suffer from the disease of PowerPoint. But this this is a question. How can you catch atmospheres via or with the means of pictures? This is not trivial, not at all. And well, the first thing here, in particular, what applies to architecture, my thesis, which I uttered already in the seminar running before this conference, is that architecture is not a visual art. Well, architecture is about constructing spaces. But I know already geometrical spaces, well, they can't be catched adequately by photographs, because, you know, spaces are at least three-dimensional, and you pack it in two dimensions. There are a lot of problems arising from that, and the problems of perspective and measurement and things like that. So it's already the traditional mathematical or geometric space which cannot adequately reproduced by photographs. But what is more, architecture is not only constructing spaces, but felt spaces. I mean, this is important. So we live in architectural spaces, and the way we are aware of them is feeling, so bodily feeling. So the type of space which really counts for architecture is bodily felt spaces. And this means that the problem whether a photo can adequately give an impression of a building, it's even more complicated than I thought at the beginning. So what is needed is not taking photographs so quick as all of us do, but it needs a certain art of photography. Well, excuse me that I mentioned Hannah again, because I was very much pleased by her series of photographs, and they had two particularities, namely, they appear and vanish, and they molded into each other. Oh, and there's a third one, is the focus differed. So the focus changed. So in a sense you approached a certain scenery and went away. And by this you have a certain chance to catch an atmosphere, or the atmospheric of a scenery by photographs. But excuse again, just to make it more clear, I hint to the presentation of Poppy Jakob, no. Well, it was on the Casamala Pathas. She was not there bodily. It was an online presentation. And, well, the strange thing was that, seen from her the formulation of her title, that she wanted to give an experience, a presentation of lived experience of this house, or even what she said, a tableau vivant. But actually, I mean, it was just architectural photography as usual, namely to take photographs as if you are photographing monuments or objects, yeah? And there was no life in the photos. And what missed is, I mean, at least people, if you're talking about lived experience in a house, private house, somebody must be around. I mean, or the ephemeral, I mean, to the atmosphere of the room, the ephemeral is very important, namely the weather, the daytime, the season, and so on. I mean, this is again a criticism as to photography or architectural photography. Those people representing a building always takes the most appropriate season and the best weather and light, and then they present, I mean, just the best condition to present the object as such, not as it stands or as it, how it fits or how it lives in the environment. This is not in average way of taking architectural photographs. So I think this could be done another way, but as to us, I think we have to reflect the function, the function of images in relation to our specific topic, namely atmospheres. Thank you.